A friend waves from 3 cars away, a full arm swinging overhead, but she walks right past without even a glance. 2 hours later, the friend sends a hurt message. I saw you walk by and you completely ignored me. She stares at her phone screen, genuinely confused, because in her memory, the parking lot was almost empty. This is not a lie, an excuse, or a failure of friendship, and the question it raises will change everything you believe about how you experience the world. At first, the answer seems obvious. She was distracted. Her attention was buried inside a glass rectangle, and attention is a narrow spotlight. We all accept that when the spotlight points one way, the rest of the stage goes dark, and what falls outside the light simply never reaches awareness. But distraction alone cannot explain what happened, because the friend's waving arm was large, moving, and right in the path her eyes swept across. To understand why the brain dropped an entire person from her conscious experience, you must follow the signal backwards, into the silent gaps perception normally hides. The central mystery is not that she missed something unimportant, but that every one of us is living inside a world the mind is constantly stitching together from fragments. Right now, your eyes are open, and the room around you feels complete, solid, and continuous, as if a camera is filming everything in high resolution. That feeling is one of the most sophisticated illusions your brain ever produces, because the raw data your senses send is full of holes you were never meant to notice. Vision seems like the most trustworthy sense, so begin there. Light enters the eye, lands on a thin sheet of cells at the back, and should paint a complete picture. But in the exact center of each eye, there is a thumbprint-sized gap where the optic nerve exits, a patch with no light-sensitive cells at all. Every waking moment, both of your eyes are sending 2 live video feeds to your brain, and each feed has a blind spot carved into the middle of the image. When scientists first mapped the retina, people refused to believe the gap could be real, because nobody walks around seeing a black hole drifting through the world. Close your left eye, stare at a fixed point with your right, and move your thumb slowly outward until part of it simply vanishes. Yet you still see an unbroken background. That is not a metaphor for filling in later during memory. It happens now, upstream of anything you would call seeing, before the image becomes your experience. Now pull back from the retina and notice something even stranger. Your eyes are not gliding smoothly across a scene like a movie camera on a track. They jump in rapid jerks called saccades several times every second. And during each jump, the visual system essentially shuts down to avoid a smear of motion blur. Yet your felt experience is not a flickering sequence of snapshots separated by black frames. It is a steady, wide-screen world that never blinks. Somewhere between the raw signal arriving and the conscious scene appearing the brain is filling enormous temporal gaps without asking permission or leaving a receipt. This is the first turn. The obvious answer was distraction, but the mechanism runs far deeper and operates constantly, not only when a phone is in your hand. Psychologists call the general process perceptual completion, and it is not limited to vision or to unconscious gaps in the retina. Your auditory system does something remarkably similar when a cough obliterates the middle of a word, and you still hear the entire sentence perfectly intact. In a classic demonstration, researchers played sentences with a consonant sound replaced by a burst of white noise. And listeners not only reported hearing the missing speech sound, but could not reliably point to where the noise had been. The brain made an educated guess based on the surrounding sounds, the rules of language, and the likely word, then wrote its best candidate directly into the auditory scene. This phonemic restoration happens so fast and so automatically that you experience the guessed sound as if it genuinely arrived through your ears. That parking lot moment now looks different. Her brain was not simply ignoring the waving friend. It was actively painting a world that made sense given what it predicted should be there. Her visual system had sampled the lot moments before, registered open space between cars, and smoothly extended that expectation across the seconds when her attention was elsewhere. To see why the brain invests so much energy in guessing, you have to understand perception not as a passive recording device, but as a ruthless efficiency machine. The world delivers far more information than any nervous system can process completely. So the brain evolved a strategy. Sample a little, predict the rest, and update only when something surprising happens. Most of the time, this strategy is brilliant because rooms do not reshape themselves between glances, sidewalks continue, and the person walking beside you rarely vanishes mid-sentence. When the prediction holds, you save enormous mental effort and the world feels stable. When the prediction fails, the error signal must compete with the comfortable story already underway. A moving arm in an empty parking lot is exactly the kind of detail that should trigger an update. Yet her prediction of an empty lot was already locked into the perceptual frame. Now add a second factor that turns this vulnerability into something close to a design feature. The brain treats unattended information as low priority by default. Even when the eyes physically land on a target, conscious perception can fail to ignite if the mind's processing resources are saturated by another demanding task. Researchers demonstrated this dramatically in a study where observers watched a video of people passing basketballs and were told to count the passes. While they counted, a person in a gorilla suit walked slowly through the center of the scene, paused, beat its chest, and walked off. Roughly half the participants never saw the gorilla, and when the recording was replayed, they accused the experimenters of swapping the video. This phenomenon is called inattentional blindness, and it is not a malfunction limited to tired undergraduates or strange laboratory setups. It is the same basic mechanism operating every time a driver looks straight at a motorcyclist and pulls out anyway, genuinely certain the road was clear. The brain did not receive no signal. It received a signal that was deprioritized, overwritten by a prediction, and never promoted into the story you call what I saw. The second turn lands here. Her failure to see the friend was not a rare glitch, but the predictable consequence of a system built to save energy by guessing. Yet framing this only as a dangerous flaw would miss half the story, because without this guessing machinery, you could not read a single sentence. Your eyes land on a word for a fraction of a second, extract just enough visual information to trigger recognition, and the brain supplies the rest from language knowledge before the gaze jumps again. If the brain waited for every letter to be perfectly registered, reading would slow to a crawl, and meaning would dissolve before the end of the clause. The same principle holds for recognizing faces, navigating a familiar room in dim light, or understanding a friend's mumbled sentence at a noisy party. This raises an uncomfortable question that moves the investigation from laboratory to life. If perception is always a construction, how much of what you experience as fact is guesswork? What you see, hear, and feel right now is not the world but your brain's current model of the world, updated by sensory checks but never replaced by them entirely. One way to grasp this is to consider a phenomenon called change blindness, where observers fail to notice massive alterations in a scene across a brief interruption. In a conversation, an experimenter might bend down behind a counter, and a completely different person stand up. Yet the person talking often keeps talking as if nothing changed. The brain is not storing a high-resolution snapshot of the previous moment. It is holding a sparse gist labeled man behind counter, and as long as the new person fits the label, the world feels continuous. This is the third turn. The same economy that makes perception fast and effortless also makes it surprisingly indifferent to details that do not matter for the task at hand. Her task in the parking lot was to reach her car while finishing a thought on her phone, and her brain delivered a world optimized for that narrow goal. The friend's wave was real, the light entered her eyes, but the evidence was never allowed to update the model, and an optimized guess became her truth. Now step outside the parking lot and consider the deeper cost of never questioning the first draft your perception hands you. Couple argues about a tone of voice that one heard as sarcastic and the other insists was perfectly neutral. Both are reporting their genuine auditory experience. A witness to an accident describes a detail that never happened with complete confidence, not because they are lying, but because their visual memory completed a likely gap. A student reads a paragraph 3 times without noticing a repeated word because the brain's prediction of the sentence, meaning overruled the actual ink on the page. In each case, the filling-in process does not announce itself with a warning label, and the completed product feels indistinguishable from direct sensory evidence. This is the contradiction at the heart of perception. The very system that makes a stable world possible is also the system that can blind you to what is literally in front of your eyes. You cannot opt out of perceptual completion any more than you can decide to see the blind spot or hear the silence inside a restored phoneme. Yet, understanding the mechanism changes something important. It allows you to treat your first impression as a hypothesis rather than a verdict. When the friend sent that hurt message, she was also trapped inside her own perceptual completion, assuming that being seen equals the other person choosing to ignore her. She could not have known that her wave was overwritten by a brain's efficient guess about an empty parking lot, but knowing the mechanism now would change the story she tells herself. This is the silence before the climax, the realization that every social hurt, every misinterpreted glance, every failure to notice rests on a foundation of invisible guesses. The brain's filling in is not a flaw to be eliminated, because eliminating it would leave you unable to see a stable world, understand interrupted speech, or finish a thought. The goal is not to escape the construction, but to recognize its signature so you can pause before the story hardens into accusation. Return one last time to the parking lot. That ordinary afternoon, the sun on the windshield, the phone warm in her hand. Had someone asked her in that moment what she saw, she would have sworn she was aware of her surroundings, because the model her brain had built felt exactly like seeing. But feeling like seeing is not the same as seeing, and this is the reversal that changes everything. Perception is not a window you look through. It is a construction your brain continually rebuilds from sparse clues, past experience, and current predictions. The world you experience is real, but it reaches you through a creative process that fills, edits, smooths, and guesses at every level before you ever open your mouth to describe it. That process is so seamless, so fast, and so usually accurate that you have lived your entire life inside the completed version without suspecting the draft underneath. Once you know this, the parking lot moment stops being a failure of character and becomes a brilliant demonstration of an ordinary mind doing exactly what all minds do. Her brain predicted an empty path. The prediction matched most of the available data, and the small mismatch was discarded before it could rewrite the scene. The price of that efficiency was a hurt friend. The benefit was a brain fast enough to navigate a complex world without freezing at every gap. The climax is not that perception is a lie. It is that perception is a collaboration between the world and the brain contributes far more than anyone used to believe. That contribution is silent, continuous, and invisible from the inside, until a moment like the parking lot tears a small hole in the seamless fabric and lets you glimpse the stitching. After the climax, the question shifts from what went wrong to what you can do, with the insight that your own experience is always a well-educated guess. You cannot force the brain to see every detail. But you can create small pauses, especially before an important judgment about what another person intended. When you catch yourself thinking, "I know what I saw," let that certainty soften one notch into, "I know what my brain constructed from the fragments it selected." This does not mean discarding your perceptions. It means holding them with the same curiosity you would offer a first draft that might need revision. Another person's account of the same event is not necessarily a challenge to your honesty. It may simply reflect a different construction built from a different prediction. The friend waving in the parking lot needed her hurt to be acknowledged, but she also needed to know that the failure to see her was not a failure of care. One conversation, grounded in the science of perception, could turn an accusation into a shared recognition that we all live inside slightly different filled-in worlds. That recognition does not solve every misunderstanding, but it replaces the lonely question, "Why did you ignore me?" with a more accurate and less blaming inquiry. You might say, "My brain literally did not register you," and that is not a metaphor or an excuse. It is how perception works for every human being alive. Now the story can shift from resentment to repair, not because anyone was wrong, but because both people learned something true about the machinery they share. The friend was always there, photons bouncing off her waving hand, the retina receiving the signal, and yet the signal was never assembled into a conscious person. The gap between signal and experience is exactly where the brain's invisible labor lives. And that gap is not a defect. It is the cost of having a mind fast enough to keep up with life. You will leave here with a quieter and more honest relationship to your own senses, knowing they are not a clear pane of glass, but a devoted, tireless editor. Next time you miss something obvious, or someone misses you, pause before the story hardens and remember the blind spot, the saccade, the gorilla, the restored sound. The world is full of gaps you never see, and filling them is one of the most human things your brain ever does.